Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, fellow patriots across the globe. We have a great schedule ahead of us today here at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. We got McDuff, John O'Loughlin, kicking it off with a great interview with the Schiller Institutes and LaRouche's David Shavin. Then we're going to move to George Webb at 12 p.m. in the Research Roadshow. We're doing a Mark Kulak replay at 2 p.m., 4 p.m. Bill Taylor, and 5 p.m. Peter Duke, all available at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. Without further ado, I'm kicking over to Mr. O'Loughlin and David Shavin. You guys have a wonderful day.
Well, welcome Ospreys and welcome everyone else to McDuff Lives here at Neighborhood News Studio. We're glad to be broadcasting as a part of this budding and growing network that's being organized up in Temperance, Michigan by Andy and crew. And we thank everyone for the participation and supporting of that network as it gets off the ground. You can visit them at their website, and I think you'll find a donation button somewhere. It's a good thing. So help them out. And well, without much further ado, I'd like to welcome back to our show David Shavin, or David Shavin, as you will. I've had friends named Levin, and I've had friends named Levin, and they spell it all the same. So I think it's probably all right either way. But with David, we've had 4 or 5 shows together already, and it blows my mind the stuff that you can wrap your arms around and discuss. And but today we want to spend some time thinking about probably the third of the trio that we didn't really get to. We talked about Mozart, we talked about Beethoven, but always in the background has been Schiller. So at the request of Marcia Maluk last week, and she actually called me up while she was in her bed in hospice care, and asked me to do a show with you on Friedrich Schiller. And as you know, Marcia passed away this past weekend, and we all send our condolences to you, David, who've known her for so long, and all the folks in her family, and the LaRouche and Schiller community generally. It's a terrific loss. So I'll turn it over to you, David, to pick up with where Marcia asked us to start.
Marcia was a force of nature, and she gives us orders to explain what Friedrich Schiller was really about. I guess we have to do exactly that. Both orders to you and orders to me. Friedrich Schiller is the poet and patriot that Schiller Institute is named after. And in a certain sense, it's easy to combine Marcia's passing with Schiller, because I'll put it this way: the job of politics is not, temporarily influencing people to some issue. Schiller was famous for looking at the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The French Revolution started 6 years after the American Revolution was concluded, and the original hope was that instead of having kings and queens, you actually would have a large part of your population actually take regular, daily, weekly responsibility for policies of their country. It wasn't just turning out to vote every 2-4 years. I mean, you might as well just have a king and a queen make those decisions if it's just a technical thing. So Schiller, in the horrors of the French Revolution as it unraveled, Schiller did not walk away from it and say, well, that's too bad, I guess. The American Revolution was just a lucky hit, a one-off, as they say. But there's something we have to look at that went wrong. And his famous phrase, one-line summary, was, a great moment in history has found a little people. Meaning, history did not have to go the way it's gone the last couple of 100 years. We didn't have to have the idea of America get pulled back into a world where it's just greedy small groups that manipulate everything. There was a better possibility. And that there was, why not have American revolutions throughout Europe where we got rid of these medieval institutions of kings and queens? So it came up, what about the little people? History would have been much different if the population had simply risen to the occasion. Instead of what happened in brief was the population got consumed by rage. There was a lot of injustices that had occurred to the lower classes in France, which got them enraged about the very wealthy. But you had agent provocateurs from the very wealthy go manipulate the rage of the population. So you had them satisfy their lust for revenge in executing people. Some of them bad people, some of them not so bad people, but just executing people. And after the thing's over, they're not any better. The world's not any better. So the question is how to stop being a little person. Marcia is one of the best examples I've ever run across of Schiller's Good Samaritan. One of the easiest ways to explain what is meant by Schiller's project of an aesthetic education, of an education of the natural inclination that a baby has towards love and beauty. And everybody says, well, we all know you run into the troubles of the world, and people learn, the baby learns that everything's not his. He's got to share with other kids. So you share your toys. And so that's a duty. You have to do that to get along with other people because, God made the world where there's a lot of other people in there too. So you still can keep your own selfish inclinations, but you just have to, respect other people's place. And that's how the world's going to be. And that's embedded in the philosophy of John Locke and others. That was not true aesthetic education. The question was how to take those qualities that make human beings qualitatively distinct from animals in terms of a deep emotional connection to beauty and to love, and to the fight for the pursuit of truth, so that in the time you have on earth, whether it's hopefully 70, 80, 90 years, that it meant something, that the world, that your unique talents were actually given an opportunity to be expressed. And in the process of doing that, it made the world a better place, that your existence was necessary. It wasn't just a good movie that you entertain yourself for a while and then it was over. So the Good Samaritan story, I won't go through that from the Bible, but Schiller's point about it, he wrote a moral fable about the stranger that's left on the side of the road and persons walking by. And he goes through 4 different cases, of people, who do offer their assistance to the stranger. They don't know him, but they don't walk by and pretend he didn't exist like people are conditioned to do now with homeless people. It's just a fact of the world. You just harden your emotions and walk by because, the actual Good Samaritan opened his heart. So the first case he goes through, I guess I'll just say it's motivated by various levels: prudence, even greed, a tortured sense of duty. The next to last case, you think that's really a good person. Now that person had all sorts of other obligations down the road, and he knew that he had a duty to this stranger to stop and put aside all the things he had to do, which would profit himself and his family and others, and he put those things aside. And you find out that's not good enough. That's not the Good Samaritan. Even though today people make this excuse all the time. I would love to have the country be a better place. I've got my family to take care of. And there's 1,000 reasons. It would be irresponsible not to take care of your family, and not to, work and get their medical care taken care of and the food and their health. Nobody's denying that. But Schiller's fifth, the actual Good Samaritan of his own accord, abandoned his own belongings, his own concerns. They carried the wounded man to safety himself. Previously, there was a man who paid somebody else to help, put himself out to pay to get somebody else to help the wounded man. So, I'm really butchering the story. People need to read Schiller's story, The Good Samaritan. But to get to the end of it, Schiller says the Good Samaritan forgot himself in his action. He fulfilled his duty with the ease of somebody acting out of mere instinct. His instinct and his duty were not two different things. He had actually, in growing up and taking in the problems of the world, shaped his identity to be necessary and useful to solve the problems of the world. And that means, things that people, they think it's not part of their daily behavior. The people dying of starvation around the world. Well, I'll send some charity someplace. Let me find someplace on the internet. I don't like seeing these pictures of starving people, so I'll do something about that. But what about actually having a country that actually has farmers, people who want to produce food, have a food policy where they get to use their talents to produce food. The Creator has given us more than enough to feed the world several times over, and we actually arrange the economic affairs so they can do the right thing, and not be in a dog-eat-dog world about trying to maintain their or earn so much money that their great grandkids don't do anything. They just inherit all the money. It's just an unbalanced way to do things. So the things we've talked about before about Mozart and Beethoven, people think, well, that's really inspiring me for the moment. But Schiller was one who asked the question that if the mind can do great inventions, great discoveries, great cultural presentations, developments of beauty, where it's not just one immediate response to beauty, but it's something that's sustained, where you look inside it, why is that beautiful? What does that say about me that moves me? Schiller's aesthetic education was the job of rolling up your sleeves, getting inside your own emotional processes, not the same way people think about with Freud and going to see a psychoanalyst, but to actually develop your emotions as you're having to deal with the everyday problems of the world, the major problems of the world. So the obvious things right now, there's no problem with Ukraine, for example. There's no reason to have any war. Ukraine's at the center between China and Europe. They can be doing great with their economy. This was actually the issue back in 2013, before the place was overthrown. But in 2013, all Ukraine wanted primarily was to be neutral, meaning have developments with the West Bloc, have developments with the East Bloc. They were like at a fulcrum point place. They would have done quite well for their economy and their population using their talents. They weren't allowed to. So what I'd like to, I guess I just, a couple of things. I had a little letter earlier in the week, Marsha's husband, Doug, provided. It was, one of Marsha's projects was in Yemen, which he's probably talked about that. It gives sort of an idea of how she was. There are other places that have had starvation in Afghanistan, and but Yemen was particularly she just, I don't know how she originally got involved with Yemen. But one of the day, she passed away last Sunday, and the foreign minister of Yemen wrote to Doug, Marsha's husband. I just have a description of it here. I'll read it quickly. His Excellency Hisham Sharaf, the Yemeni foreign minister, expressed his deepest sympathy to the dear friend Doug Maluk on the passing of the companion of his life's journey and wife, the American fighter Marsha Maluk, after a life marked by struggle and advocacy for development and peace. From Yemen, His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, valued the spirit of sincere advocacy that Comrade Marsha Maluk enjoyed in her defense of Yemen's rights, specifically in the corridors of the U.S. Congress to stop arms sales to the perpetrators of the aggression against Yemen. The foreign minister recalling her participation in the first BRICS Day in Yemen, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It's an association of those 5 countries. The first BRICS Day in Yemen emphasized that Mrs. Marsha Maluk was a role model for women pioneers, especially in her adoption of the cause of Yemeni in the LaRouche movement, together with the BRICS Children and Youth of Yemen. I'll just, for the last paragraph. There's a whole movement Marsha triggered in Yemen, a youth movement there, where they've studied LaRouche's writings more deeply than almost any population in the world, I'd say. In his message of condolences on behalf of the Yemeni government, His Excellency Hisham Sharif expressed his sincere condolences to his friend, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and all the members of the LaRouche movement around the world who grieve for the tragic loss of their tenacious and courageous comrade shall remain present in the memory of the advocates and lovers of peace. Most of the remembrances of Marcia and her work will be collected together, and there will be a memorial, so people have their own thoughts on it, whether it's a paragraph or a page or whatever. I encourage people sending it in. They can send it in to me. If you have Marcia's or Doug's emails there, John, addresses, you can provide that. But the Marcia was one of the best examples of somebody who's did not really think of duty. She really had found herself in her mission, and there was nothing fake about her. She's the authentic deal, because she didn't look for causes like some Hollywood celebrity to associate with their name. She simply looked at problems that were bigger than her and decided she had to become big enough to deal with those problems. And that's really one of the best ways of describing what this aesthetic education is about. We've talked about Mozart's operas and Beethoven's works and stuff like that in some detail, but it's not just nice entertainment on the side. It's a matter of having the proper cultural tools that allow you to get momentarily gripped by something beautiful, something deeply emotional, and use that as the unique pathway to figure out something about yourself, some rich talents about yourself that should not just pop out episodically in your life, but actually should be brought to the fore and become the center stage of your life.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm not hearing myself very well. Oh, I see. Pardon me for that. A fighter, as described by the ambassador, and this is somebody that you don't. If you saw a picture of her, you wouldn't think she was a fighter. But to attribute like that is something that anybody would want to have from those that have been touched by your work. The word tenacious also struck me, because I remember, I just asked Harley if he wanted to, if there was other people that involved with Schiller and LaRouche that would be that he thought might be able to contribute to McDuff Lives, and he put me in touch with Marcia, and tenacious is exactly what she's been. She lined up, I guess, at least a dozen shows for me, Friday after Friday, and never failed. We always had great guests, and I got to expand my mind as well as those that got to watch into areas that we just found to be really enlightening and fascinating, from so many of the great people associated with Schiller and LaRouche. So, but right before the show, you blew my mind with a definition that I had never ever had before, and I think if I can just ask you one question at this point, I would ask you to expand upon this idea. You said that aesthetics is the education of the emotions. And I thought, wow, that is a very, very concise way of saying what we're missing, both in public education as well as in our culture generally. It is what we lose when our families fall apart, when our tradition of growing up, in a family is broken, like it's being so violently all around us. Kids without mothers, without fathers, being shipped across the world, refugees. This whole loss of the sense of educating your emotions. So, Schiller, would teach us how to do that. And maybe you can give us a hint as to how that's done.
Goodness. I mean, I don't want to reprise the abduction from the Seraglio and those other stories, but well, let me put it this way. The only other passage I'll read today is actually from Lincoln's second inaugural, which is a beautiful example of educating the emotions. This is a point where, and it's not put this way very often, people talk about the very last stanza, with malice toward none and charity for all, firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right that, let us strive on. It's very inspiring, but that's really not the work done in the speech, the aesthetic education, the tutoring of the emotions. What think about a leader of a country who, after 4 years of civil war and more deaths percentage-wise ever in our history, and it's within weeks of the end of the war, and everybody knows they've conquered, they've solved this thing. And what Lincoln does not say is, "Wow, thanks for sticking with us, guys. That this was a really tough fight. We did it together. We're sharing the credit." It really wasn't that speech at all. Our second 4 years is going to be the Transcontinental Railroad, and we're now going to, work together and making life better for everybody. That's not a bad speech to compose something like that. What he chose to do was say that let's get at your underlying emotions right now. I know what tragically is embedded in people right now. What's embedded in people that if left unaddressed is going to cause a tragedy in our society. And that's that you've had loss. You might know maybe it was your brother who died, your son, your father, your neighbor. But in your mind, there's nothing that will make up for that. You'll sit there and think, well, why do we have to go through that? Oh, my government made me sacrifice, and the leader said we had to go, win this war. And we did it, and that was my duty. Well, let me just turn to you'll get it from Lincoln's version of aesthetic education, which is one of the, aside from Shakespeare and maybe some passages in John Milton or Edgar Allan Poe, it's one of the best examples of I could find. And it has the advantage of him being a political leader, somebody people think not as a poet or as somebody providing aesthetic education.
When did he compose this?
This is a couple weeks before he died, his second inaugural. He was elected.
Got it.
Yeah. So it was March 1865, I guess, is when the inauguration was.
Yeah.
I think John Wilkes Booth was actually in the audience, sizing things up. I'll just start near. Well, I'll start back a little bit. On the occasion corresponding to this, 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it, all sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease. Cause of the conflict might cease with or even before the conflict itself should cease. It already had the legally wiped Emancipation Proclamation to legally wipe out slavery. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Now we're getting to the aesthetic education part. Both read the same Bible and prayed to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask, adjust to God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If we suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? I mean, the question he's asking, we don't know exactly why there's such evil in the world, that the United States had this scar in its founding of slavery and is now having to deal with it. We don't have the answers. We don't know all that. But for whatever the reasons of God, the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove. So there's something about this problem that human race has gone through, in the United States in particular, which we have to go through. You might ask the same question about why you only get to live a certain time and then you're gone. The world, there's certain problems that have to be dealt with. Now here's his concern. Shall you discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Does that mean that God is nasty? He set up problems to torture us? What is happening in your heart about how you think the universe is composed? So what he ends here is saying, fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. That's a big challenge to put on a population. If it don't, you think 4 years was bad? I don't care if it took 250 years. If there's certain tasks and jobs that have to be done, no matter how much personal suffering goes on, don't think that the world was created unjustly. Don't sit there and just feel sorry for yourself. You know, it has to be done. And in doing it, you better not come out of this war harboring thoughts about the world and your creator, hard thoughts that he makes me do things. I did it. I sacrificed. The rest of my life is going to be for me. You know, I paid my price. I did all that can be asked. That's not the way the world is. There's something about evil in this world which we have to take on. And the process of taking it on, we may be afraid that it's going to crack us, that we're not up to it, that the world will be better off if we just look the other way, because I'm not up to dealing with it. And you're just asking me to throw myself against a cause that will destroy me and won't do any good. Well, that's not aesthetic education. Aesthetic education is you have to take in the problems of the world. It doesn't mean you can automatically you can be a macho and pretend you can solve everything automatically. But that's the challenge. If you have a child that's born genetically defective, it's either going to make you a better person or it's not. But your solution is not to walk away from it. There are all sorts of troubles in this world. And the American Republic says you don't have the king and queen make the decisions, the daddy and mommy. You actually got to wrap your identity around historic challenges. We don't boss other countries, but the United States is supposed to be a temple of liberty and a beacon of hope. We're founded as an idea. And yeah, I know we've gotten a long ways away from that, but that is the idea put on the stage, and Lincoln took it very seriously. So aesthetic education, and we've talked about it in terms of the operas and the culture, when you get wrapped up in a problem and you have the composer has the advantage. He can craft very beautiful effects to draw you on, to lead you on, and carry you when the logical argument doesn't necessarily get you automatically where you have to get to. So you can have a beautiful melody carry you, engage you, and you'll be concentrated on something and fascinated and put other things aside. But bottom line is, whether it's a Lincoln speech like that, crafted the way it is, that's how he talked to people. That's how a head of a state talked to a population. Better than what people try to get from the best preachers or philosophy students or something. So I think we can talk more about aesthetic education, and that might be a strange way for me to explain but that speech is poetic, and it's poetic in the same sense of Mozart and Beethoven's, or what Schiller said, that Schiller wrote plays, that the theater is a moral institution. He didn't mean you wrote plays where you lectured people about politically correct things. You should do this, you should do that. He meant you've got to engage a population and grip them, so when they go out of the theater, they're changed. They've gotten a unique confrontation with their underlying axioms and underlying, in some cases, prejudices, in some cases, underlying principles, but they've had an opportunity to have those secret thoughts, underlying thoughts, examined, deliberated upon, played out in front of them, and in the process, they've become a changed person, a person who can tackle the problems that going into the theater they didn't really think they could tackle. I guess the one last thing, I thought about Lincoln's second inaugural because of Marcia, because when anybody close to me passes away, to be honest, I know their life was totally necessary. I know it was a blessing to know them, but you still, feel the loss, and you wonder why things are made this way, why it has to go that way. And Lincoln's second inaugural has always been my go-to work to try to challenge people on what the rules of this universe are, and how the creator actually works.
I'm fairly speechless. I've had a very dramatic week of losses. Of course, we lost Marcia, but also last week this week we buried my wife's Aunt Lucy, and Aunt Lucy was 101 years old. She
Mhm.
was buried with her husband at Arlington National Cemetery with full honors, and we attended. And she was buried along with her child Jeff, who was born with a birth defect. And while Lucy served as a nurse in the Pacific in World War II, and was with MacArthur in Melbourne, what a woman. She then, after her son Jeff was born with a severe birth defect, spent the rest of her life nursing him.
Hmm.
And her other son has just grown up to be this wonderful, wonderful man who's taken on all the responsibilities of family and children, and just a terrific example. So, perhaps Lucy's example lives on in her family. We have,
It's quite a generation.
and then one of our great colleagues, Mark Kulak, lost his stepson to the disease of addiction over the weekend, and he's just devastated. This assault on our country with opiates is truly hitting everybody, and it's just going to get worse unless we find some way to stop it. The idea of aesthetic education is far from the minds of most of our teachers and students in education nowadays, who are just trying to get their daily work done and pass all the necessary tests or pass out all the necessary information and teach a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't really approach the ability to understand Schiller or even perhaps even appreciate Beethoven, except for a few you know, extraordinary examples. That this lack of connection between our children and this culture is like, I feel like I'm reaching back through you to try to pull Schiller back into our world and to say, yes, you're right. He is right. We do have to be active. We do have to play our part. And I don't know how to explain my relationship with what I call a higher power or God, but it is lack of faith in anything greater than what we see and smell and taste and feel that causes that despair, in my opinion, where we don't acknowledge anything beyond what, the values of these small elites that you've spoken about that want to own everything and control everybody. And on the subject of slavery in particular, I think it strikes me very, very resonantly in connection with this totalitarian nightmare that we seem to be facing, a descent of the technocracy upon the world, where everyone's going to have a number and everyone's going to be perhaps subject to social credit scores or worse if you don't comply. I think that the enslavement of the common people of the world is now perhaps on the agenda of that small group of elites that somehow have gotten the power over the rest of us. It's chilling, and it's hard for me now to talk to my friends who I've loved for so many years, my musician friends who generally are very liberal and would, definitely vote for Biden over Trump, and that kind of just simple-minded, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, and that's all I need to know. And I hate Orange Man, and that's all there is that they need to know. Well, what happened to their aesthetic education? These guys probably can play the hell out of a fiddle, but are they able to talk about what Lincoln just said? I want everybody to wake up, not just me, not just you, not just the Schiller people. I want the whole world to wake up and wake up now before this descent of a totalitarian nightmare continues any further.
Well, again, I just say, I mean, a specific artistic act that people can do is to go to the LaRouche organization webpage, press the button under actions, go find the leaflet that just got composed about world food production, and start initiating what people think is impossible. On one level, just common sense about do we really have the capacity to feed and also clothe and house people? The I don't know the death toll out of Afghanistan this last winter, the toll that the human race took. I don't know you wouldn't have such a drug problem in the United States if such a positive agricultural potential in our rural America had not been turned into this agribusiness garbage.
Of course,
you have a purpose. Anyhow, but there's a leaflet. It's a short leaflet. It doesn't solve everything. It's a page or so. But people start identifying: is it possible? People have learned the opposite. Whether they're liberals playing violin someplace who hate the Orange Man and their identity is wrapped up in that, they're good people. They can pat themselves on the back because they found somebody that they ridicule, or whether or not they've embedded the idea that it's a dog-eat-dog world. We've got to protect our own. Liberals have just open hearts, and they just are silly, and they're going to give away the company store. Both of them are ridiculous. There's got to be a place where what the leaflet concentrates upon is. Well, let me be very clear. Yesterday there was a meeting. The Argentine foreign ministers in India. The Indian government's offered Modi, the head of the Indian government, has said, we can actually produce more food than we're producing. The world's facing right now not 1 or 200 million people in jeopardy, but around 800 or 900, close to a billion people out of over 7 billion people are certainly food deprived, with increasing proportions of that billion in jeopardy of dying this year. Now, is that God? Now, can it be profitable for people to produce food and be the right thing? India's offered to gear up production. The World Trade Organization says, no, you can't do that. Why? Because India gives support to their farmers the way the United States used to do with parity pricing. They give support to their farmers of over 10%. Well, that means they're restricted, according to the World Trade Organization, not to produce more food. India's offered massive amounts of grain to Afghanistan last fall and winter. You know, they're reaching out of their heart as a good Samaritan, and had to fight tooth and nail against this one world gang. So it just started from, the Indian government is not perfect for any stretch. They had a big fight with their own farmers a year or two ago, but there's now a proposal on the table in India that they actually just break from the World Trade Organization, impose rules, and they're meeting with Argentina, and Brazil are having meetings on this, how to get more food production going on around the world. It doesn't have to put any food producing country, is not a threat to some food producing country someplace. Oh, you're not making as much profits as you were before. Just put that aside for a second. You know, the question is, when you have a billion people, whether they all die this year or not, if you simply have them in deprived situations, we're going to have a worse disease than COVID. You're going to have viruses, you're going to have biological threats simply in the process of parts of the world being immiserated, having bad water, having, bad. So this cleverness about saving yourself by turning your heart hard is what this leaflet addresses. So people just to stop, realize the damage that goes on every day that puts us into our corners where we can't have where anything called politics in the country stinks, because you can't actually have a discussion about organizing the agriculture and industry and the talents of this country to do what's right and to be totally profitable in the process. So you look for around the world. India has had massive problems with China over the years. They hate China more than we do on one level. They've had wars, physical wars against each other, but now they're talking about they're reaching out to each other on the basis there's a bigger problem. This London, New York financial gang is going to try to have a thermonuclear confrontation with Russia over Ukraine for in a gang warfare type situation. More could be said, but India and China are watching this thing and they're saying, hold it. If Putin and Xi in China in February can make an arrangement, February 4th, I believe, about how they're going to push, basically, in so many words, it's if the dollar system is going to depend upon looting countries, then what do we do to get, whether the capitalist countries or communist countries, regardless of what they call themselves, Russia overthrew communism, they're capitalist, China is certainly a socialist country. What do they do in terms of forming trade relations, of maximizing the industrial and agricultural and scientific capabilities of each one and benefiting from trade with the other? How do they do that outside the dollar system if the dollar system has now come to stealing countries' money, stealing Afghanistan's money, stealing Russia's money, just saying we can steal it, it's ours, we decided. They're no different than those musicians you run into that pat themselves on the back and say, I'm moral because I know somebody who's an idiot that I hate. And that's, you ask, so this leaflet, you got to change the discussion. Actually treat citizens as if they're supposed to be a citizen and supposed to be engaged in a real discussion. And I know in the back of their mind they'll go, I've been through this before, I've had good thoughts, and for some reasons I don't understand, society is not organized so those good things happen. My church tried to do charity for somebody, and that's as far as we could go, and you can't go further because all politicians are corrupt, the whole process is corrupt. Well, the LaRouche movement just simply walked away from that 40, 50 years ago, and we've earned our stripes from being gone after, and everything in the world's been, all the aspersions in the world have been done, and we're not going away. And China saw that, and in 2013 announced basically the LaRouche program. We're going to now we just finished taking, what Helga LaRouche was involved in back in the 1990s in China was a program to really end what they had been doing for decades and do what they call socialism with the Chinese characteristic. But it really meant what Franklin Roosevelt did. They've spent 30 years taking around 700 to 800 million people out of poverty. They didn't do it with handing out checks. They did it by modernizing agriculture, water projects, big industrial infrastructure projects, like we did in Michigan with all the factories. So that program has gone on. In 2013, China said, all right, we in the past, we sort of preferred having the big Western countries. They go into other parts of the world and offer their solutions and pathways. We don't do that. We are more insular. We stay in our area. But in 2013, they said, we can't go on this way anymore. The West is crazy. We're not going to offer our poverty eradication program to the world. What is called in the West is they're trying to do debt enslavement of countries. It's just silly. The debt enslavement is going on in New York and London. So there are programs in South America, Africa, the Middle East, around these, which are being offered. Now, the world's not perfect because the real war confrontation, that's what the thing about Ukraine was about in 2014, January, February 2014, the Maidan. The Ukrainian government just simply had the sovereignty in November of 2013 to say, we're not going to simply play this game, Cold War game, of going with the free trade stuff in the West and turning our back on the East. We're going to represent both. We're going to be neutral. What the East wants to buy from us are products from our industries, where we get a profit from working up the product. We're not just a raw materials exporter. What the East wants from us is just more raw materials. What the West wants from us is just more raw materials, and we don't make much profit on that. We want to actually use our talents, have higher education, more scientists, more skilled technicians. This is what we can be. They got told, this is how these things get solved. You don't hear about it. What you hear is somebody's undemocratic in Ukraine. We've got to overthrow them because everything's going to be better after that happens. So I've said a lot in the last 5 to 10 minutes, but the point is, there's a bigger world out there, and Americans are problems right now. Their despair comes from simply walking around with the Lyndon LaRouche leaflet, putting it out on the internet, handing it to your friends, taking it to your church, put you at risk of saying, LaRouche, he's worse than the Orange Man. What did they say about us over the years? Here where I live, they said in Loudoun County, Virginia, they said, oh, we castrate animals. Because at the time it was a farm, they had cows and dogs and stuff like that. Whatever you make up, it's a Hitler big lie. You can go check it out and find out whether it's really true. But the point is, it's such a big lie, people just feel dirty associated with the name LaRouche. He hates whites, he hates blacks, he hates Jews, he hates Christians. And therefore, when it's not that people believe that. It's just that when you have to sit there and read something and say, here's an idea from somebody, all that stuff is running around the back of your head, saying, well, this looks pretty good, but I've been fooled in the past. I'm going to be fooled again in the future. And you got aesthetic education is you got to change that part of you that's a victim that just says, well, I'm just a little bitty guy and I'm going to get victimized by one group or another. You got to develop your independent judgment. I mean, it may be too late in life to become a scientist of plasma physics and fusion energy. Maybe that's for your grandkids, but those things, aesthetic education is for Schiller is not just, I want to sit in a theater, be entertained nicely, and I feel better in some way when I come out of there. I feel inspired somehow. That's nice. But it's a great moment in history is right now, and we can't have a little people just sit there and wave little yellow and blue flags because they're for Ukraine in the same way and against the bad guys in Russia. They're just being fools. We have a moment in history where the fact that these international financial gangs have to risk thermonuclear war confrontation to try to back down any country that wants to reconnect the creation of credit, the creation of money, wants to reconnect that to actual projects of industry and agriculture. So producers generate wealth, not printing money produces wealth. And for countries to have rules which reward medium, long-term investment in real production, is good capitalism. It's good. Henry Ford would love it. It's not what we've become accustomed to, which is really just dog eat dog. I can make money by conning somebody else. Somebody else has to go down for me to get ahead, and I'm okay with that. And that people, I'm not saying people, everybody has the same mental state as a few of these gangs of financial speculators, but they're in big trouble. And for countries to stand up to them now, they're the one. It's the New York and London financial crowd that are in big trouble. The amount of risk and ugliness they're involved in right now puts them in big trouble. And the more they've tried to isolate China or isolate Russia, it's created a bigger problem for them. Because China and Russia, and now India, it's a horror show that these geopoliticians think that India is going to cooperate with China. This is half the human race. It's not a few people who, most of the human race, not on the side of the poor Ukrainians that we're going to sacrifice them to the last man, for this show, this theater show against Russia. Most of the world doesn't agree with that. So people should just be a little bit scared. It's not about going to the internet and find out that there's some new conspiracy that's, that I don't agree with. That I know there's some stories about why the Russians aren't all that bad. That's not good enough. You got to figure out what is it about the people running. It's something scary that there's an ugly thing in the world that's manipulating things on such a deep level, and they deserve to get away with it if we can't make ourselves bigger, more capable people. And I'm suggesting it starts. The first Aesthetic Education Act is go to the LaRouche Organization webpage, look under the action button, find the leaflet it came out yesterday about food production, read it yourself, and then make a decision what you're going to do.
Will do. And we've got about 2 minutes for me to ask you to just fill us in with one more question. That's this. The most famous text that people know from Schiller, of course, is the text of Ode to Joy from the Ninth Symphony. And it is an appeal to joy, to Freude, happiness. And that, I think, is also a large part of Schiller, is that we have to be joyous. We have to be happy warriors in a way. Maybe not Hubert Humphrey's way, but happy warriors. Any comments on what is the happy side? Why do we love that passage in the Ode to Joy so much?
Well, Beethoven spent his whole life trying to get himself up to the level that he could do a proper setting of that. In German, Freunde and Freude, joy. Freunde, very close to it, friend. The English word friend comes from that. So that what's partly being played upon there is this friendship of what really does unite the million, the millions, the masses of the world. It's not the Beatles, about love conquers all. That touches people, but it's actually examining whether or not God put on us and our feelings toward our fellow man, our friends of the world, where this true joy can be a more true joy than just feeling good on a given day. And the bond of nations, it doesn't mean we wipe out nations, individual sovereign nation states, but the bond that should exist, that allows nations to cooperate with each other and find their own way forward, should give us a greater joy than we've experienced among anything else. And the musical challenge there, as you know, was to, well, it's a much longer story than 2 minutes. It's maybe we've covered it earlier, maybe we have to cover it in the future. But the task of actually getting people to look at how this double counterpoint, these two different ideas, both interrelate, and then to examine the process that the human mind is capable of figuring out, to think over Beethoven's shoulder, to acquire some of the power of Beethoven in dealing with these great ideas, is part of what's involved in him breaking off that wonderful song. He actually, how the Ninth Symphony works on the setting. He has to do these three gorgeous movements, and then in the opening of the last movement, he does something nobody else has ever done. He has a dialogue with the audience, bringing up their memories of what happened in the other three movements, and saying that's not good enough. And you say, what the heck is not good enough about that? What Beethoven, you better have something really good, you know, if you're going to put me through this. You know, it's like the Samaritan, the what Schiller does in the Samaritan story. You can go read. He really poses the question: what? I don't think anything is more possible in my personality that could identify something, you know, what's insufficient about what's happened up to now. And Beethoven challenges people on that, on taking introducing the Schiller song about Freude, and then developing that with the powers that he's already articulated in the first three movements. And I'm afraid of running over time, but that's my short version of what happens after the introduction of the poem and the song, the singing of it. And you know, Beethoven doesn't just go through the poem and say the poem is the greatest thing in the world. He actually takes only parts of the poem and sets it, and he uses that as the basis of, well, how does an orchestra use its powers to go beyond even the words? Even the words are great, Freude and Freunde, and you know that's a certain level, but Beethoven wasn't going to just set Schiller's poem to give it a nice stage appearance. He was going to actually take the power that went into that he thinks Schiller did in doing that poem, and showing how all musical composition can now be challenged to go further than it's ever gone before. So it's hard to summarize that work very quickly, but there is a higher joy than simply. It's wonderful, you know, having a kid. It's wonderful watching that kid grow. It's wonderful all the things that people are given in this life to great joy of. It's wonderful to fall in love and to have an abiding relationship. There's bigger joys. Those are just foretastes of what we're here to do in this world in our lifetime. And Marcia was a wonderful example of Schiller's aesthetically educated human being. I'm glad you got a taste of her.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks, everybody. I will be back tonight with Professor Hamamoto at 8 p.m., and we will turn things quickly over to Andy DeBala to continue with the show today here at Neighborhood News Studio. Bye to everyone. Thank you, David Shavin, once again, and we will see you tonight.
Thank you, David. Thank you, John, for the wonderful start to the day here at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. Everyone over at McDuff Lives and McDuff Lives 2 and John's Facebook, make sure you go over to neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. We got George Webb and Research Roadshow coming up next. I believe he's live from Slovenia, you know, Melania, Slovenia. It's going to be a good show, ladies and gentlemen. That's coming up next at neighborhoodnewsstudio.com. Are you going to be taking these down, Tyrone?